Well, I'm really happy you're all here. Thank you coming. Thank you for coming. Okay, thank you all for coming. Doug, take it away.
Greetings, everybody. I'm Pasadena Photography Arts co-director Douglas Hill. I'd like to welcome you all to our latest forum virtual presentation, Looking Backwards to Move Forwards, with scientist and photographer Phil Warren.
Hello.
Over the years, we have been fortunate enough to call the Armory in Pasadena home whenever we've been able to meet. In January, the Eaton fire claimed the homes of some of the Armory's staff and teaching artists. The Armory is now asking for donations of any size to help them be of support to their coworkers in this extraordinary time. All funds go to those who were directly affected. Also, in the wake of the Eaton fire, AltadenaPhotographers.org was set up as a registry to photographers impacted by with replacement equipment. If you are in a position to visit AltadenaPhotographers.org to find out how. And if you are a photographer who's been affected, please also check in with them to see how you can avail yourself of equipment and other things that AltadenaPhotographers.org is making available to you. From the beginning, PPA has been dedicated to fostering the photography community on the east side of Los Angeles. Toward that end, we are proud to support these entities dedicated to photography and the arts. Today's forum does not have an underwriter. However, if you would like to help us present a future or open show, please contact us at PasadenaPhotographyArts.org. We appreciate all the support we can get. We have several events planned for the fall, including a presentation by our third annual Pasadena Photography Arts Prize winner, which will be announced later this summer. So check with PasadenaPhotographyArts.org for updates. And now for something completely different. Phil Warren is a color scientist and computer vision specialist who has worked for the last 15 years in the film industry to develop new ways to see the world. Working for companies like Panavision, Dolby, and entertainment technology consultants, he has asked a lot of questions and found a few answers about how we can capture and display more interesting images. In his free time, he does pretty much the same thing, except riskier, stranger, and more collaboratively. Phil has said, "I'm an engineer, I'm an explorer, and an adventurer. I photograph to connect with the people around me and to prove that the world can be an exotic and exciting place. My stories aren't always believable, and I had initially fallen into photography as a way to bring my audience along with me on my odd and exciting adventures. Nothing is more rewarding than making friends while creating art. So let's make something together." It's my great pleasure to introduce Phil Warren.
Well, thank you so much for that intro. It's a pleasure to be talking to you guys. And without further ado, I want to present, if it's working, there we go. Looking backwards to move forwards. New photography with notes from the old world. So I'm Phil Warren, a color scientist and computer vision specialist, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my photography and a lot about color science. Having worked for companies like Dolby Labs and Panavision, I help companies in the film industry develop new technologies, and I'm dedicated to putting novel, creative tools in the hands of the everyday consumer. Now, I started out in film school, learning not photography, but film tech for the movies. When I graduated college, I didn't initially like the visual effects industry, so instead I started doing graphic design and photography for a few different companies. The first time I photographed was for a healthcare company, helping them tell people about their services. I wish I still had some of these photos. Remember, keep your photos, even if you don't like them. Maybe 20 years later, you'll want to show a room of photographers how much you've grown. Then I became a fake flower photographer. The company sent me to live in China, where I photographed fake flowers and Christmas trees in factories around Guangdong, mostly in Shenzhen. I lived mostly in Kowloon, Hong Kong. I learned Mandarin poorly, and I learned that I just cannot speak Cantonese. I've forgotten most of the languages, but I will always treasure the experiences I had there. Then I started traveling. I fell in love with it, and I photographed all over the world. I photographed kudu in South Africa, tribeswomen in Thailand, and mysterious churches in Ireland, rattlesnake catchers in West Texas, and unmapped sewers underneath Los Angeles, and abandoned structures all over the American Southwest deserts. And that was pretty exciting, making friends with my camera, getting to talk to everyone, but I wanted to do more. So I'm going to adjust the knobs on photography a little bit, painting with light that a human eye can't always see. In every section that's to come, I've tinkered with the camera, either physically through optics or digitally, and got results that I felt made an interesting image. And my hope is, as I've developed these, that other people might follow and do likewise. So I started inventing new ways to look at the world. I looked at what people 2,000 years ago invented and how they saw the world. How did Ptolemy look at the stars? And I used that. Now, Ptolemy had struggled with the idea of how one might project the spherical celestial heavens onto a flat plane in order to map them. And he perhaps was the first to come up with this idea of inscribing them on a glass sphere, dropping the sphere over a lit candle, and projecting it onto the ceiling, where the resulting lines could be traced. And the result, arguably, is the most skewed map projection one could possibly make. Except the VR was becoming a big deal, so maybe I could intentionally lean into this skewed map projection. Oh, come on. And it turns out, yeah, I could. Though my first shots were photospheres that I made by crudely manually pivoting a cell phone around, I learned to use a small VR camera to obtain the same thing. So this was pretty easy to do while canoeing in Tennessee or exploring the Vallislavase panorama in South Central Los Angeles. And the images got weirder. So I used this little bit of the past to do something that admittedly many photographers before me had done, but it sure was fun. Turns out you only need to swallow a camera a little bit to make a really interesting selfie. And I did find that this gave me a new way to present my adventures with a new take on the medium of photography. If I was immersed in a strange environment, I could show my audience what that felt like, suspended in a cloud of fluorescent orbs or a surrealist seascape of rainbow tendrils. And again, pretty exciting, but what if we could move beyond what a human could even see at all? Now, you probably know a little bit about this already, but this is going to become pretty important, so we're going to drop out of normal photography for a second and talk about science. Now, light has a visible wavelength, like everything on the electromagnetic spectrum, and we can perceive everything ranging from violet, around 390 to 400 nanometers, to deep red, around 720 nanometers. Now, as we look up at a rainbow, photons rain down upon us like so many droplets of splishy, splashy color. However, our human eyes can only catch a certain range of these photons. Above the red wavelength, infrared photons go unperceived, and below the blue wavelengths, ultraviolet photons are likewise not seen. Now, our awesome human eyes can perceive color by catching those photons, those droplets of color energy, in cone cells that behave like buckets. Most people have exactly 3 buckets and only 3 buckets in which to capture these photons. These buckets, which are actually 3 kinds of cone cells, are long cones, which catch red light, medium cones, which catch green light, and short cones, which catch blue light. At this point, our brain is now given color information with these triplet sets of data, a paradigm we call the tri-stimulus model. Now, we can never directly perceive the spectrum because we can never dump out the buckets and sort the droplets to see what specific wavelengths that photon was. Instead, we can understand intermediary shades of color by observing where the buckets overlap. If photons tickle both our red and green cones, we identify yellow or orange. If photons tickle both our green and blue cones, we see cyan or indigo. And cameras, unsurprisingly, are set up to mimic the human eye. However, the silicon sensor on the back of the digital camera is, by itself and before the camera is fully put together, sensitive to a much wider spectrum, 300 nanometers to almost 1100 nanometers. If cameras actually photographed in this range, however, the photos wouldn't accurately resemble the world the photographer was trying to capture. See, the image on the left doesn't look right at all. To ensure that cameras do accurately capture color, a manufacturer would now install a hot mirror to bounce back photons invisible to the human eye. This is the camera that gets sold on the market, which accurately captures visible light and nothing else. And in order to divine color from this single sensor, manufacturers coat it with a very fine array of translucent tiles, a color filter array. Now, this only lets certain wavelengths into each pixel. If we think of each tile as a bucket, again, we end up with a group of 3 buckets. And again, the digital camera has taken light from the real world spectrum and sorted it into the tri-stimulus model with a red channel, a blue channel, and a green channel. Now, you can take apart a camera and tear out the hot mirror that blocks invisible photons, thus returning your sensor to a state where it can catch all the photons, visible or otherwise. In order to photograph in the infrared or ultraviolet world, we have to do this. This is going to come up later in my talk. But there are several shops you can find online that will convert your camera for you to see the full spectrum. I use Kolari to do this conversion for 2 of my cameras, and now I have full spectrum cameras that capture from ultraviolet to infrared. So now we can photograph outside the human visible spectrum. But why do we care about doing that? This means that now we can look at tintype photography. Now, tintype, if you aren't familiar with it, is best described as kind of an old-timey Polaroid from the 1850s, wherein a large format camera exposes onto an emulsion-coated iron plate, not actually tin, and produces a very unique black and white image. Now here we have Kevin Bacon and Kristen Wiig captured by tintypist Victoria Will at Sundance in 2014. Now, why do these look so unique? Sure, they're black and white or sepia, but there's something very different. Their faces look haunted, their wrinkles deeper, and their eyes far more emotive. So I worked with another color scientist, Neil Lund, in San Francisco, and he sent me his notes where he had actually characterized the spectral properties of the emulsion surfaces that were used historically. So cadmium bromide and potassium iodide, they had really unique properties. And what we discovered is that they were actually capturing more ultraviolet than they were the visible spectrum. So nothing, in fact, above aquamarine was being captured at all. And what that tells us is that we have a clear target if we want to recreate tintype with a digital camera. Now we can clearly see that Kevin Bacon lies between 350 nanometers and 550 nanometers. So how do we achieve this capture? Now on a full spectrum camera, the answer is simply filters. So now I throw a few filters on my lens, which admittedly has to be special to move those ultraviolet photons through, and we get digital tintypes. So here we see my friend Elliot at the Bonneville Salt Flats under nothing other than sunlight in front of my digital camera. He looks rugged, he looks like a cowboy, and I was pretty happy with this effect. So I pushed it a little further. Here's a self-portrait of me. Now, if you notice, in real life, I don't really have any freckles. The all the melanin deposits, most of the sun damage occurs in the ultraviolet spectrum. So you're going to look a lot more rugged. You're going to look a lot more aged. And if you recognize this gentleman on the right, this is Anthony Michael Hall. He was pretty into this, so he sat with me and we did a bunch of photos in New Mexico. Now that's great if you have a model that's comfortable looking rugged, weathered, and aged, generally older men. But I was concerned that maybe this technique would never be able to really be used on younger female models who didn't want to look that way. And then the model Asteria proved me wrong. She looks absolutely statuesque and lovely in this format. Tintype works so well. I'm really happy with this. And then my friend Sandra absolutely demonstrated that digital tintype can look every bit as emotive and stately as the original analog format, but without the need for your own studio and environmentally dangerous chemicals. I feel like this is a safe way to democratize a medium and bring it into the new era. Now, are there other ways we can play with ultraviolet? Like, if we can capture it, why can't we emit it? So I took a look at Woods glass from World War I. So Woods glass was developed as a light filter used in communications. The glass filter worked both in infrared daylight communication and ultraviolet night communication by removing the visible components of the light beam, leaving only the invisible radiation as a signal beam. So now you can flash signals invisible to enemy combatants. Now, Woods glass was commonly used to form the envelope for fluorescent and incandescent ultraviolet bulbs, which now we call black lights. And in recent years, due to its disadvantages, other filter materials have largely replaced it. And I was thinking, well, a modern flash is almost an incandescent. A compressed xenon bulb is what basically every flash you've ever touched actually is. Now, it's a little spikier, but it still has a pretty good spectral power distribution. So I think it's possible that we could use this the same way they used Woods glass in World War I. And if I could remove the filter on a camera, why can't I do that on a flash? Well, it turns out you could. Now, this is an important note that most flashes, if you buy on the market, you need to dip the bulbs in hydrochloric acid to remove the coating that would actually block those ultraviolet photons. But if you get a cheap enough flash from China, say made by Godox, you just need to pop out the plastic filters and you're pretty much done. You have a full spectrum flash. Now, it only takes a little Duvetine and a hot glued on filter ring, and now you can fire black light. You can fire whatever spectrum you want as long as you have those filters. So this is my Dark Flash version 3. It's great for tintype photography, but also really great for rave photography. And we immediately tested on quinine, which is in tonic water. And a lot of people don't know this, but every bottle of tonic water on Earth is UV fluorescent. So that means under black light, it will glow. So there's really no tricks here. This is a normal camera photographing with a dark flash. And I discovered that if I turn up my dark flash all the way, I get the highest intensity black light you could imagine without revealing any skin tone. So I can render people like an iPod commercial from the early 2000s, or I can dope it with just a little bit of visible light and capture exotic accents on wardrobe. Now here's another self-portrait and Angel 004 performing ASL music under my dark flash. And perhaps my favorite photo I've taken in this format was the band Rat Brains Everything they were wearing fluoresced wonderfully under the dark flash. So that was pretty cool. But let's move that forward a little bit. What if we looked at the Vietnam era infrared? Now, I became obsessed with this film stock called Kodak Aerochrome. Now, this came to my attention when I saw a preview for this film, The Enclave, a film I still haven't managed to actually watch. But check this out. And I'm going to mute my computer. So this was my first exposure to this film stock, and this is amazing because I've been shooting with infrared for many, many years, but I've never thought about a way to present actual skin tone. Uh, and having an infrared film stock that can pass blue is incredible. So this was historically very fascinating. This was developed in the Vietnam conflict, and it was a form of infrared film that also passed some visible wavelengths. So now skin tones, blues and greens were reproduced just a little bit, which sounds beautiful, but ultimately made this a very disappointing use of a beautiful medium, as it was used to spot enemy combatants, largely through aerial photography. This means that green camouflage clothing, which absorbs the infrared, still appears green, thus revealing the combatants in a sea of salmons and crimsons. Now, this was discontinued in 2009, and even before it was discontinued, this was hailed as the most expensive film that money can buy. It was very difficult to use, pretty much impossible to meter for, had poor dynamic range, a very unexpected response to visible light, and was very grainy. So I looked for a way that I could recreate this, and it was pretty apparent that we were going to have to use, again, a full spectrum camera because I needed to use infrared. Well, it did turn out that Kalari carried a IR chrome filter, and I just added an additional Tiffin yellow #8 on a full spectrum camera. And I was pretty happy with the spectral response. Gathering this, we see that, oh, here I have a cell phone mounted on top of my camera, so I can take visible spectrum while comparing it to augmented. And you can see that green paint still shows up as green. So it really looked like I'd done it. I was capturing the photons that I was looking for with the help of the Kalari filter that was designed exactly for that. And I felt like by dropping in this yellow filter, I could attenuate the blues a little bit and bring skies back in, which was very important to me. But as you can see, while I explored North Hollywood during the pandemic, it just wasn't quite there. The colors were being captured correctly, but I didn't feel like they were being displayed correctly. Now, this looks really cool. Well, look at the skies. Because we are dealing with infrared, we're able to drop those down and really capture these beautiful lavender skies. And that's cool. But again, this feels like its own thing and wasn't exactly what I was looking for. So I looked closer at the Kodak Aerochrome, and I wrote something called a lookup table, which allowed me to take the spectrum that I gathered and shift it a little bit, move the colors based on the pre-existing notes into what actually would have been captured for the Vietnam era conflict film. And I'm fairly certain I got it. I'm very happy with these results. Here we have my friends Ben and Shane and houses in South Pasadena, and I'm quite proud of this. Now, you can look again at my original photography before I moved into a LUT-based change in that. This peacock coming out of the grass at the Arboretum is one of my favorite shots in Aerochrome. But once I adjusted it, again, I find this so striking. I'm so pleased with this intriguing format. Now, to talk about modern infrared, this isn't the most novel thing. Most of you have probably already tried to dabble in this, and it's fun, but I feel like it's very important for what we're going to delve into. Now, I've already talked about ultraviolet photography, but infrared photography, it's kind of the exact opposite. It's also often delivered in black and white, but it's the opposite of tintype in as much as it completely smooths out the subject's face. Everyone is rendered as this perfect porcelain doll, but they're missing all emotion. The micromusculature movements, the emotive eyes, uh, everything that you're looking for in tintype photography is now just totally gone. And the eyes look almost demonic. They're deep black, and I don't feel like they really capture what I'm looking for in photography. So what a lot of photographers like to do is we augment those colors. We actually allow for a little of the visible spectrum to be allowed in. Usually I start at 560 nanometers, allowing for oranges and reds. And we use very inexpensive consumer filters to let light in at these lower wavelengths on our modified cameras. Then we just do a red-blue channel swap digitally, and we get these pretty stunning images. Remember this image of the Buddha shrine. This is going to come up later. That was at the base of Runyon Canyon, and then the conservatory at the Arboretum. I'm sorry, not the Arboretum, the Huntington Library, looking directly up. And of course, I really can't issue any sort of new technology without trying to shoot in the desert with it. This is at the art commune of East Jesus in the Salton Sea, and North Hollywood, and an abandoned eatery in the Mojave Desert. Now, something really fascinating about infrared that shouldn't be ignored is that the photons bounce all over the place and flare so much. And at first, when I started in this medium, I kind of avoided that. I really tried to paint those out or angle and carefully block all my lights. But finally, when I started embracing the beauty of those light abnormalities, I felt like that really boosted my photography game. Now, importantly, I felt like, what if we could combine all these things that we've learned so far? Now, everything I've shown you so far has been done by other photographers, I feel, but I am fairly certain no one has actually combined infrared photography into tiny planets before. So I built a nodal rig, which allowed me, after careful calibration, to spin a camera around its entrance pupil, and now I can capture hundreds of photos that are stitched together to make a perfect photosphere of an infrared landscape, and then do that Ptolemaic stereographic projection. So here we have a baobab grove in the Los Angeles County Arboretum, and a Japanese bridge at the Huntington Library, and the Galway Cathedral on Nuns Island in Ireland, and the Desert Gardens at the Huntington Library, and the abandoned Lake Dolores or Rockahula Water Park off the 15 on the way to Vegas. And that very same Buddhist shrine that we saw earlier, but now as a photosphere, is compressed to this tiny planet via stereographic projection. And perhaps my favorite photo that I've ever taken is in the lily ponds at the Huntington Library. This is a very normal pathway, but it explodes into infrared color when projected via infrared through stereographic projection. Now, another thing I'd love to discuss is 1920s Technicolor 2-strip. Now, okay, it's not hyperspectral or quite the same kind of crazy, but I'm really into this. So Technicolor tried a 2-color model in the 1920s. Now, as they frantically researched how they could do full color projection, which they knew they were going to get there, they just hadn't yet, they came up with sort of a stopgap to present a sort of pseudo color to audiences. They figured out that by using 2 colors, they could sort of sandwich the film strips together. Using a minty green and a crimson red, they could present a facsimile of color just with 2 pigments. Now, it turns out that gluing two strips of film together that were somehow both goopy and brittle was not a good idea. So these generally only got a few plays before they were too damaged to be used. So very few of the 37 films produced survived to be studied. However, I did work with Technicolor to do just that. So I recreated this for modern cinema. Um, and this film we finished shooting at the end of last year. It's now moved into post-production. We are looking to gather investors and anyone who wants to work on it in post with us at pinkvioletmovie.com. But here you can see we've recreated the film grain. We've really taken, well, let's see, I've taken care to reproduce every bit of the spectral sensitivity of the cameras. We only have 4 stops of dynamic range, and I can't wait to release an article and actually put this back in the hands of the public, because this has been lost. I think this is going to be the first film in 90 years that is released with this technology. So yeah, I'm very excited about that. Now, a bonus round. This does not refer to old technology, but here's a few strange things I've been working on. So it's all well and good to discuss infrared as I've been talking about it, but when we look at infrared light, well, all bets are kind of off. The translucent tiles in your camera simply weren't designed for this, so they don't know what to do, which means they all kind of fail the same way, allowing 50% of all infrared light in. And that means that our buckets overlap completely with no differentiation in the infrared spectrum. There's no triplet set of data, no tri-stimulus model here, no way to remap this into actual color. But I want to. I want to see the world as though we had 3 cone cells, as though we've adjusted the knob and our eyes could actually see an infrared spectrum, say from a 760 to 1100 nanometer spectra in 3 buckets. So let's figure out how to do that. So we can use the consumer filters I mentioned before that start allowing light in at different points on the infrared spectrum, but they all have no upper terminus. They all let in as high of wavelengths as the sensor will allow, meaning they all cut off around 1100 nanometers. So I used 3 of these filters, mounting a different one in front of my lens for each shot to take these photographs while I changed the filter between the shots. Now, I did not change the position of the camera, the subject, or the light. And for this demonstration, I took a photo of a rainbow I created with a xenon bulb firing through a prism. One allows in 760 to 1100 nanometers to pass, and we'll call that image A. One allows 850 to 1100 to pass, and we'll call that image B. And one allows 960 to 1100 to pass, and we'll call that image C. Now, we endeavor to computationally derive 3 separate buckets. We already have the high band bucket in image C, so we can just leave that, and that's going to become the red channel. For the other 2 digital channels, we perform basic subtraction, pulling a blue channel by subtracting B from A, and then a green channel by subtracting C from B, and possibly, for the first time ever, we have a tri-stimulus model entirely in infrared. Now, because these optical filters weren't perfect and had a little roll-off, there's even going to be enough overlap to have intermediary shades. Now, if we drop these using some software I wrote back into a TIFF image, well, as the red, green, and blue channels, we can revisit this visible rainbow, which is really boring, and realize that now we have an infrared rainbow, which is really exciting. This rainbow is further out with narrower bands, exactly as we would have anticipated. So we've done it. We've created a tri-stimulus model in infrared in a system I've named jokingly after the game where you hide a ball under 3 cups, thimble rig. So using that same technique on a crackerjack-loving taxidermied raccoon, we see his domino mass disappear, and this cuddly trash panda has less to hide. A pineapple growing in the Huntington Library becomes a ghostly and beautiful thing. And a rainforest orchid loses all of its attractors for pollinating insects. And that's all well and good, making some pretty pictures, but what if we wanted to change the world with photography? So about 6 years ago, I found this amazing group, the Pavlov Foundation. Now, it's a foundation that seeks to help children through their journey with pediatric cancer using photography as a healing art. It's built around Pablo, a little boy who was diagnosed with kidney cancer. When he passed away, his parents found that he'd taken hundreds of photos documenting his journey, and they founded this group in hopes others could find solace likewise. I was immediately hooked, and I felt like this was the best possible thing I could do with my talents and experience. And ever since, I've been a mentor, a camp counselor, and taught photography for him in a variety of capacities. Uh, so the Pavlov Shutterbug branch is a program specifically designed to meet the needs of kids and teens living with cancer. Any students enrolled in the course, which is free of charge for them, will learn photography skills directly from caring professionals. And they're going to meet and learn alongside students going through the exact same journey, which is really important. We find that this has been a very painful and isolating experience for these kids. So this is a great way for them to meet up with someone who's shared that experience, but is now sharing in something positive with you. And this is a way to empower them to express themselves, develop their creativity, and just be kids. And they also receive cameras and their own equipment at no charge. So this is, by the way, the photo on the right is called Heart on Sleeve, and it was shot by one of our students, Hayaz, at the age of 17. So are you a photographer? Maybe you should become a mentor with us. Teach the Shutterbug students, share your love of photography. It's virtual and in person. If you want to do either one, you can choose to work with younger students or the older ones. So share your passion, make a meaningful impact, and empower children, and gain a new perspective yourself. I think my photography has really improved, actually helping these children, and connect and support families in your community. This is a really important service you can do for families around you, and meet some other photographers while you're at it. Now, if you're not a photographer, if you're not actually involved in volunteering, you can also just donate, or you can learn more at pavlov.org. So all the program's proceeds go into research grants, and this directly funds cancer research. And the kids know that. The kids that are shooting actually get a chance to take some agency during this terrible time in their life and actually fight back against this disease. So that's pretty cool. So that's probably the most important thing that I've discovered with photography. And that's really the end of my talk. So thanks for taking the time to listen to me. If you want to hear more about this or other novel photographic techniques, I'm Phil Warren. Grab me after the talk, chat on LinkedIn, or write me at philip.john.warren@gmail.com. And check out my website at philwarrenphotography.com, and just find me on social media. So thanks for listening. This was very meaningful.
Phil, thank you so much for a fascinating presentation. I mean, the possibilities of the technology that you've been developing is remarkable, and I know people who would be more than happy to run with such innovations. And did the idea of contacting you is great. Are there any organizations aside from Pavlov that you've been developing where you have other photographers getting together just to talk about the technology and the possibilities?
You know, I haven't really. I was very lucky to meet the group F8 a few months ago, but I think that was the first photographic interest group that I had the pleasure to meet up with. I really haven't found anyone, and I've actually found that there's been some pushback amongst analog photographers against my digital techniques. I'm I'm really intrigued to democratize this and bring this into the hands of anyone who doesn't necessarily have enough money for tons of antique materials and chemicals. So it's very important to me, but that's not always well received in the community. So
Yeah, some groups can get very entrenched in what they're doing, and
yeah,
that's fine for them. But I know that there are others out there who don't share that view, and I hope that you're able to find that community,
I hope
and
so.
I hope that we're able to help you with that.
Can I make a comment? This is Bill Wishner, and I met Phil before, and I was intrigued with what he's done, both from a photographic standpoint and his willingness to work with children in photography. I had tried to do that myself and found it very, very hard. So I was very grateful. But I want to get back to the Pavlov Foundation just for a second. I did contribute after I met Phil, but since I contribute to cancer research in many ways already, I wanted to support Phil and the Pavlov Foundation in their photography. And I made a donation specifically directed at the shutterbugs. So
We
they would
appreciate
have
that.
those funds, not necessarily for cancer research, but supporting the kids that have cancer with their photography projects. And I urge anybody who wants to contribute, you can divide your contribution in the cancer research, give it to the Pavlov Foundation, let them do what they want with it, or you can direct it towards their photography group, the Shutterbugs.
And that makes all the difference in the world.
Everybody here is welcome to unmute themselves and ask a question of Phil. And Phil, I'm just going to be very techie here because the whole idea of taking a camera and being able to change it, which I know you can do, into infrared, but what you brought to light today was that there's a lot of decisions to be made in that spectrum.
Yeah.
That spectrum. So, like, if one wanted to convert a camera to
Mhm.
an unusual spectrum, how do you decide that? I mean, you've done all the testing, but
That is a really good question because that was actually the very first mistake I made when I first jumped into this, because it's real easy to find an intriguing look and say, I want to build a camera just for that. And then your camera can only do that for the rest of its existence. So that's a bad idea. What I discovered is the best way to go is convert your camera to completely full spectrum, where it lets every photon of light that it could possibly let in. And then after the fact, add filters in front of the lens, because a lot of those infrared filters are mere dollars. They don't even cross the $20 line, so they are incidental to swap those. Now that does get challenging when you're talking about very wide angle. When I do astrophotography, I have to put a sensor, a filter directly on top of my sensor called clip-in filters. But they exist and they make things so much easier. So doing the full spectrum conversion first, and then get filters as you want. I will also say ultraviolet photography those filters are unbelievably expensive. So I kind of built up to that. It took me a long time to get there. And I started in infrared until I was very comfortable. And it does take some time developing a comfort level with that, but that's part of the fun. You have almost infinite shots, so you have time. It's great.
wonderful, fascinating. Thank you.
I have a practical question.
Yeah.
How delicate is a rig once you have it set up? I mean, as somebody who works in the streets as well as, in just about anywhere, do I have to be, if I had it set up the way you're talking about, do I have to do anything in particular to protect things
Not really.
more than one normally would?
Yeah, not actually at all. I will say that thimble rig IR is impossibly delicate. It's more a novelty, but everything else, honestly, I remember being on a trip to Ireland with my friend, and I was being very, very ginger about my equipment, and commented, he's like, well, this is what you have equipment before. And I realized that, yeah, if I'm being impossibly delicate with it, what am I doing? So honestly, I don't want to say I mistreat my equipment, but yeah, it's all hardy. It's exactly as hardy as it was before. And the Nikons, I generally stick to the Nikkor lenses, so they're weather sealed too, which is really nice. So yeah, it's no more delicate than it was before, and I love running and gunning. It's great.
Phil,
Great. Thank you.
I have a question about, I mean, this is another technical question. First, I love the recent ones you're doing. They're so beautiful. They look like
Okay.
botanicals that you can't quite figure out at first. And, it's just such a new way of looking of us to see the world that it's really cool. Um, I have shot black and white infrared for quite a while, and I don't know if the way my camera was set up was uh I'm not sure what happened, but it basically would only focus correctly with one particular lens. Is that a situation that is generally the case? You have to set it up for a particular lens?
It gets so intricate when you're talking about optics because lenses are designed, and I researched this so much in my time at Panavision. Lenses are really designed to beam steer a very specific set of spectra. And the instant you move out of that, there's no guarantees that lens will ever focus that light correctly. So there are some lenses that just aren't going to work as well in infrared, and that's unfortunate. And then when you move into ultraviolet, you have to start getting into really specific lenses because you want the glass has to be uncoated. So luckily there was a Nikkor lens, a 50 millimeter one that is very inexpensive, and it was so inexpensive that they didn't coat any of the glass elements, so it could pass ultraviolet photons. But more to your question with infrared, that unfortunately is kind of anticipated, that there just is difficulty moving from lens to lens. And a lot of times you also need to, well, not a lot of times, almost always, you need to do manual focus and really can't rely on autofocus when you're shooting hyperspectral.
Can you ask them to adjust it to, like, what I really like to use was a 100 macro to shoot macro with it? And can you ask it, Kalari or whoever you get it converted
I
to?
don't, admittedly, I can't speak for them, but I don't believe they employ optical engineers because ultimately it's an optical engineer who needs to do that kind of conversion. And to be honest, I don't know any shops that do that because that question's plagued me as well. And now there are, if you're in LA, actually, I think I could recommend some optical engineers who maybe know how to do that. That would be a new service, but I know I have friends at Camtech that have been very helpful in these pursuits.
Life Pixel is actually one that does a conversion and will convert it to your specific lens.
Will Life Pixel actually adjust the lens though?
They adjust where the sensor is at. It's something to
Yeah,
do with the glass and the sensor itself.
yeah, but that is relative to the flange depth. I'm not sure that is actually something that I don't know if you can mail in a lens. I'll be honest, because I have talked to them before. If that's a service they offer, I think that'd be relatively new.
No, actually,
Oh,
they've been, well, I had one converted by them 10 years ago or so.
oh, really? And they did your lens for you? Cool.
Yeah, they actually said they prefer you to send the camera and lens that you want to use it with to do the
Fascinating.
conversion. I've had other people like Kalari do them, and I had a problem with the camera that I converted by Life Pixel, and it was very specific to the lens, and they had to correct it. I've had
Fascinating.
other companies do it, and I have not had it be that sensitive. I mean, the focus was just way out of whack.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, if you're doing a new one, grab a mirrorless because that will focus better.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to admit that because you are confined to focusing through what is ostensibly just your live view, that your circle of confusion gets a lot more confusing if you're using a DSLR or older camera. So I do kind of regret that I'm not using a mirrorless for those.
Sorry,
Phil,
I,
we have I think a question or a comment from
Oh,
Gail Nichols.
yeah.
Gail?
Hi, my internet is really bad, so I might freeze. But I want to tell you that I'm fascinated with your tintype, digital tintype. I've never seen that before, and I want you to talk a little bit more about the setup and the lenses.
Oh,
You,
certainly. So I have 3 lenses that pass ultraviolet, and I have found I have a Petsfall, and pretty much any Petsfall you find is going to pass ultraviolet, which is great because Petsfall lenses do a lot of intriguing stuff, but they also come with their own flaws. They're very there's a lack of clarity around the edges that I don't love. So those were all the images I showed you were shot with the same lens, which was a Nikkor 50 millimeter, and I cannot remember which 50 millimeter, but it is literally the cheapest one they made. It has 0 coating on it. And then I used a Shot BG25 filter, which is orthochromatic blue and ultraviolet. And then to filter out the infrared, let's see, I'm going to go back and look at my notes. I used a S8612 filter, which is also Shot, and that just cuts infrared. Because the Shot BG25, while it allows ultraviolet to pass, it also allows infrared to pass. And there's always just so much infrared, and that'll blow out your ultraviolet if you don't filter that out. So yeah, full spectrum, Nikkor 50 millimeter lens, Shot BG25, and S8612 filters.
For those of
yeah,
us that use Leicas, would you recommend that you just buy a cheaper camera with a
Yeah,
reasonably good lens and monkey with it rather than starting to screw with your Leicas, which is very expensive to do?
yeah. Which, man, I would love a Leica monochromatic full spectrum. That would be amazing, but the cost is astronomical in doing that. So, yeah, honestly, especially when you're starting out, screwing around with a cheaper camera is the way to go. My first infrared was a Nikon D70, and that's not much of an investment there.
I have a question too. So, well, thanks for the talk, but also, do you need some other kind of equipment besides like what you've mentioned? Because my particular question is, how does light metering work now that you have the full spectrum? Do you need like an additional meter? The in-camera meter somehow can work too, or what?
Light metering is a thing in this. Largely, you should be doing it using your histogram. That's almost the only way, because if you only care about whether or not any of your sensor buckets are being blown out. Typically, a light meter operates at 512. Is it 512 nanometers or 412 nanometers? Doesn't really matter. Kind of a highlighter yellowish green. And generally, we are not capturing that when we're shooting in either ultraviolet or infrared, or the Kodak Aerochrome. So instead, you kind of want to have your histogram up and meter that way. Now, I think on my Nikon, your metering is done just natively through the histogram. So you can still use the in-camera light meter, but you don't want to use external tools for that. But that's a really good question. Very insightful.
Something else like, so is the consideration of light out of the visible spectrum relevant for some other kind of film stock, or just?
I am so glad you asked that. So this has come up now that this division is re-entering the conversation. I don't know if you saw the movie The Brutalist, but when you are shooting in some of these older formats, if they have the halation filter removed on the back of the film, which a lot of them are starting to do, infrared bounces through the film, hits the back of the camera, bounces back forward, and exposes the red channel. So what happens is if there was a lot of infrared, you get crimps and halos, which is really fascinating and very important if you are looking to do process simulation later. So if you wanted to simulate this division, if you want to simulate halation, you do need to think about infrared. So I think that's pretty cool.
Oh, that's
If you're
fascinating.
talking about colorblind photography,
oh yeah,
tintypes, and I shoot calotypes,
oh wow,
and it's pretty interesting. All you need to do is use print paper. So I call them calotypes for the 21st century.
no
And
kidding.
you can see how it changes. Blue eyes go transparent. This
Yeah,
lady was a redhead. So you see lots of freckles.
yeah, that's amazing. So
This,
what's your
this
style?
couple, they look bronzed.
Yeah,
And this is, I shot these two about 40 years ago. They're 8x10 paper negatives. And over several weekends, we shot about 400 portraits.
oh, that's incredible.
This one I shot in Shanghai, 4x5.
That's really cool.
They're about, in bright sunlight, f/16, about 2 seconds.
Whoa.
So I don't shoot sports.
How do you get your subject to?
This one, this guy can hold still. This is an 8-second exposure.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I shot it in my studio.
That's
So you
amazing.
need a lot of light.
Yeah. And you call those calotypes?
Yeah, this is actually the first system that came out. It beat Daguerre by about 2 weeks.
Really?
This man, light blonde. So what happened was, this is the system developed by William Henry Fox Talbot in England. He announced it in 1839. And then Daguerre came out. But Talbot's system was really the first negative positive system that was the model for our modern film photography.
Oh man.
The problem is Talbot wanted everyone to pay royalties to use his system. He patented it. Daguerre gave his system to the French government, and the French government let anyone use it for free.
This is so cool.
But the daguerreotype used highly deadly chemicals.
Yeah, the amount of mercury used in that is staggering.
Yeah, but calotypes, you shoot the paper and develop it like a print.
Yeah.
And then I scan it into the computer.
Yeah.
And it comes out really quite amazing. And of course, with modern print paper, you get these beautiful prints.
So it looks like this is mostly, I mean, it's table salt and silver nitrate. So sodium chloride and silver nitrate.
Well, but with today's print
Gentlemen,
papers,
excuse me. Sorry to interrupt, but this is really fascinating. But it sounds to me like the two of you ought to be connecting offline, perhaps. We're
that's
unfortunately out of time.
And
Okay.
thrilled because it
okay.
was with me.
And
Well, thanks
yeah,
everyone.
that was a
That was
fantastic
so cool.
presentation and very stimulating. Whole new world.
Yes.
So I want to thank Phil and all of you who showed up for being with us. And we look forward to seeing you again at one of our future events. We don't have exact dates yet, but we'll be posting those soon. And we look forward to seeing you then. So thank you all so much for being with us. And look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks everyone.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for being here.